playbook that we've seen before. You know, there are 22 unnamed co-conspirators in this indictment, and there are names you don't see in here that we don't know. We don't know if the current Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones is one of those 22 unindicted co-conspirators. We don't know if he is or isn't. What we do know is he's not indicted in this case, and he was involved particularly with the alternate electors. And so the fact he's not indicted in here, we don't know who the unindicted 22 are. It's important to point out that this may not be the end of it. There could be a superseding indictment, and there could be people who aren't indicted that might be indicted in the future. We just don't know at this point.
And, you know, something that we've talked about is just kind of the methodology behind criminal prosecutions. It could be that some individuals are not indicted because the hope is that they may become cooperating witnesses during the course of the prosecution, and some kind of plea deal may be reached. But you know, or an immunity agreement, I should say, could be reached. You know, if since they haven't been indicted. But there's so many moving parts here, and we've been talking a lot about RICO and the fact that RICO is the top charge here, and it's something that the statute does allow for quite a bit of flexibility for prosecutors, for instance, in kind of how long the trial process can take. But we did hear Fani Willis say a short time ago that she wasn't going to drag it out, that we could expect trial. I believe she said 6 months. Yeah, that's extraordinary. One other thing that's interesting in here, in addition to the 41 counts, there are well over 100 acts that are indicated as furtherance of those crimes. One of them is directed directly at Governor Kemp. Donald Trump tweeted, remember, he had 80 million Twitter followers. I know this because he retweeted one of the things I said during the 2020 election, and I immediately gained 10,000 followers and lost 10,000 followers, and then literally received death threats just because he retweeted me. And that tweet became an exhibit in the January 6th hearings before Congress. And we won't go into the details of all that, except to say that Donald Trump's Twitter account was incredibly powerful. And it's actually indicated as a criminal act in here as intimidation, essentially, of Governor Kemp by saying he should resign from office for not overturning the election, an element perhaps of the crime. Yeah, it's really stunning. And, you know, we mentioned also the lawsuit against Governor Kemp being part of the indictment here, and obviously that was thrown out. But there's a lot here. We could take up all the time. But and guys, one more thing before we send back to you, AtlantaNewsFirst.com. We do have an entire page that lays out all of this. We have a Trump indictments page and the Trump investigation page. Please check it out. We've put a lot of work into it, making sure it answers all your questions in anticipation of this very moment. Very well organized. But I have to point out one of I think the most popular things on that page, on that whole section, the phone call. You can listen to the entire phone call. Back to you guys. Yeah, it's certainly a wealth of information there on our website. Joy, Brendan, thank you. We do want to head out to political reporter Doug Reardon. He's been covering this story for us all day long, was inside the room when DA Fani Willis spoke. They put you outside right now. Of course, the courthouse, they want to get on with their night and close things up. Now we're well into Tuesday. Doug, what can you tell us from your perspective? Been out there all day covering this story.
Right. Well, look, when you're a journalist, you're used to getting kicked out of rooms, so no harm, no foul there. But yeah, this was what we had been waiting for all night, and really for the last 2.5 years of this investigatory process. And I want to just go back to something that Brendan and Joy were talking about, which is something that the DA mentioned in her press conference, the difference between overt and predicated acts here. Of course, why is a RICO charge a good move for the district attorney in this case? It's because Georgia law allows things that happen outside of state lines to be brought into prosecution if they were in the furtherance of that alleged conspiracy. And so we were reading through that indictment before her press conference. We've been reading through it afterwards, and the amount of mentions of different states and things that allegedly took place in places like Michigan, Pennsylvania, Arizona, they were very heavy parts of this indictment because you are allowed to to consider those types of things when you are talking about a RICO indictment here in Georgia. And so for the district attorney, I think for all the legal analysts, including our own, speculating that this was going to be a RICO indictment, they hit the nail right on the head, and perhaps from the district attorney's point of view for the right reasons too. Now, a couple of housekeeping things. The 19 people who are facing indictments, charges in this indictment, have until next Friday, that's the 25th of August, to appear here before Fulton County officials. We know that during a press conference with Sheriff Pat Labat a couple of weeks ago, before all this, he was saying that they're going to treat the former president and all other 18 of those defendants as they would anybody else. So that means fingerprinting, that means mugshots, that means a check-in on Rice Street, where the Fulton County jail is. That's something that we really haven't been seen yet in any of these indictments out of New York, out of Miami. It's federal indictment in DC. And so that would make this quite unique. We also talked last week, and I think it's important to note here today, that once this does go to trial, whenever that may be, weeks, months, or even longer, that there will be cameras allowed inside the courtroom. And so we will actually get to see a former president on trial in real time as we cover this for our viewers. And again, that is something that will make this unique versus those New York and Miami and DC indictments as well. A reporter in there asked a really great question. It was something that was on all of our minds, and I heard a couple of people trying to shout it out as well, which is the timing of this and the pace of the investigation. People had a lot of concerns about how long this was taking. This was about a 2.5-year investigation leading up to today, since that infamous phone call to Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. And people were wondering what the holdup was. We even had comments from Governor Brian Kemp saying he was frustrated with the pace of this. And now, of course, we're on the precipice of an election cycle. And so that is something that a lot of people were crying foul on, saying this is political. We've heard the president say it many times. In fact, he had a statement out just minutes after this indictment was made official, calling these moves political. And so the reporter in there asked the question and said, how do you convince people this isn't political? And Willis said, we do this based on the facts and the law. And that is something that she has echoed time and time again over the course of this process, as people have considered that more and more as we get closer to this election cycle. And we're really in it already. It starts earlier and earlier every couple of years. But it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, given the scheduling conflicts with the former president's other indictments, given the scope of this. We have 19 people, all, of course, being charged at the same time, because this is a racketeering case. And so it's going to be an interesting thing to watch this play out, guys, scheduling wise. But again, very important to note, August 25th is the last day these 19 defendants have to report here to Fulton County authorities. So we'll keep you updated, guys. We'll be out here tonight. We'll be back out here tomorrow, keeping an eye on things.
And Doug, as you've been talking, we've been looking at some pictures from some of the previous court appearances that the former president has made related to some of these other charges that he's facing. These are all still camera images that we're able to see. But when he comes to Georgia, it's going to be different. There are going to be television cameras in the courtroom. Tell us about that.
Right. Well, Georgia actually has some very, I guess, looking at it from our perspective, some very good laws in terms of access in the courtrooms. That is something that, again, as you mentioned, makes this very different than his indictments out of New York, out of Miami, out of DC. If our viewers don't know, there are no federal courtrooms that allow cameras inside. And as for state and local jurisdictions, that'll be up to the judges. And that's the case here. It will be up to the judge. However, Georgia has some very relaxed and progressive laws on allowing cameras inside the courtrooms. And so the way it goes here is you would have to have a really good reason to not allow cameras in the courtroom, something like a child victim or a witness who is of a sensitive nature. And of course, there really is none of that here. And so we expect this to be televised to our viewers when this happens. Again, the big question, the one that we probably won't have an answer to for some time, is when the trial will actually take place. But yes, when it does, we expect to have live broadcast television coverage of this. So the first time that we'll see the former president on TV in a courtroom, letting this legal process play out in real time.
All right, Doug. Thank you. And of course, Superior Court Judge Robert McBurney showed us he wanted transparency in the courtroom, and that is what we've seen so far. Now, we do have complete coverage of the criminal charges against former President Trump. That all continues online right now on our Atlanta News First app as well. You can see those charges right there as we list them out, including violation of the Georgia RICO Act. That was the primary charge there on that indictment that a lot of local attorneys had been talking about. DA Fonnie Willis, very familiar with those RICO charges, has pursued those in previous cases, including the APS teacher cheating scandal, and solicitation of violation of oath by a public officer, conspiracy to commit impersonating a public officer, conspiracy to commit forgery in the first degree, conspiracy to defraud the state as well. Now, there are some 19 defendants in that, including former President Donald Trump, 41 counts altogether, 13 of those charges against the former president. When DA Fonnie Willis spoke, she said each one of those defendants faced one count of the RICO Act, I believe she said.
All of them are
all
facing
of them,
that.
right? Face at least one count of the RICO Act, and a number of other things. Too, also want to point out as well. She mentioned, someone asked her about the trial date. When will this happen? Of course, have those against the former president as well. She said, she wants to move this case along, obviously expeditiously, but in regard to those other states, but expects that a trial date could happen within the next 6 months.
Another reporter asked the DA about any overlap between the Justice Department's case against the former president when it comes to election interference and the Georgia case against the former president when it comes to election interference, and whether there's been any discussion between the two offices. Jack Smith, the special counsel working appointed by the Justice Department, the Attorney General Merrick Garland, and of course, Fonnie Willis. She would not go into that. She didn't want to talk about any discussions that the two offices may have had, but you have to think that because there is so much crossover, that there has been some discussion about the best possible way forward for the prosecutors to try to get the best outcome for them. And so it'll be interesting to see exactly how all of that plays out with the timing of when these cases are going to be brought to trial.
Absolutely. A monumental day in Metro Atlanta and in Fulton County. Of course, tonight, former President Donald Trump now facing 13 charges. Those 41 counts in that indictment. He is one of 19 defendants named in that indictment.
Everybody go all around the world.